What do alleged book bans in 2023 and Stranger Danger of the 1980s have in common? As it turns out, more than you might realize. In today's episode, I review Pennsylvania Senate Bill 7, which addresses explicit content in school libraries and curriculum. And then you can help me take a bite out of, well, something. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, especially thank you for giving me your time so very early. All right. So we're going to get into it. We are going to be talking about this bill this morning. So let's dive right in. Let's see what some of the media hype says about this. Always good to start with a little media hype in the morning before we really get into the nitty gritty of this subject. So let's go ahead and pull that up on the screen. How about that? And we will play. This is from ABC News 27. It's a little on the old side. So this is a news broadcast about a couple weeks ago, but the bill just recently passed the Senate in Pennsylvania. So this is the Pennsylvania Senate, not the U.S. Congress Senate, and will be going on to the House for them. So let's take a listen.
Well, it is a question that has gripped Pennsylvania for years now. Should certain books be off limits to certain students?
Tonight, the Senate committee says yes. Our Sarah Wilson joins us live in studio with the details. Sarah?
Alicia Dennis, Senate Bill 7 just passed the PA Education Committee today. It would ban sexually explicit books in schools. Supporters say it is a no-brainer. Others aren't so sure.
We believe Senate Bill 7 is a book ban, plain and simple.
The gross mischaracterization that somehow this is a book ban is just so absurd, I can't even get my mind around it.
A war of words during Tuesday's Senate Education Committee hearing.
This, to me, my personal perspective, is evil.
Emily Zimmerman is a parent and school board director in Lancaster County. She's talking about books she says she can't believe are in her district's middle and high school libraries. This is one of them. It's called Gender Queer.
These profane sexual images and text, seen and read, are engraved in a young and impressionable mind with the potential of significant consequences.
That's why she's backing Senate Bill 7, which would make, quote, sexually explicit books off limit to students unless a parent or guardian signs a form allowing them to view the material.
I feel like we are fighting for the hearts and minds of our children.
The bill violates students' constitutional rights.
But there is major opposition, in part from the Pennsylvania Education Law Center, which argues that parents already have control over what their child reads.
The bill also explicitly permits school entities to remove books and materials preemptively.
Your whole argument I just find juvenile and nonsensical.
The Pennsylvania Library Association notes that a government agency removing information gets dicey and can fall under censorship. It argues librarians already monitor what goes on school shelves.
We do think that thoughtful conversation between parents and students and parents and school librarians, as well as adults talking to their library professionals, is worthwhile.
And we also reached out to the Pennsylvania School Library Association for comment. We did not hear back. Alicia?
Sarah, thanks very much.
All right, so let's talk about that clip that we just watched. So first and foremost, I'm gonna kind of start with the very end there, where she's like, "Well, hey, we reached out to the Library Association." You know, it's not a given that they reached out in time before the broadcast. I've seen this multiple times on social media where someone's like, "Hey, you know, such and such organization reached out and they wanted to ask me, you know, some questions," but they reach out at like 6 p.m. and they're like, "This is going to be published at 7 p.m." Oh, they didn't reach back out. I guess we didn't hear from them. Right. So take things that you read and see in the media with a little grain of salt, because sometimes they're not always so forthright. They're like, "Oh, well, we reached out." But then you find out that they reached out like just before putting out the information, not giving the person enough time to actually comment. So I don't know, you know, I don't know if that's the case in this particular situation or not, but I know that it does happen. So we kind of got to be on the ball with our media, because you know, they're not always so forthright. Another interesting thing is, you might have noticed at the very beginning, they started talk they were calling it a book ban, but then and then the media folk, not like the people they were interviewing or showing video clips of, the media called it a book ban. And then later they were like, well, this gives parents permission to you know, control over it, and so they have to opt in and allow their children. So on the face right now, just hearing from this clip, it doesn't even sound like a ban to begin with, because a ban means like, you know, and what that raises a good question. Like, what does a ban mean? Most people think of like a ban means it's just not allowed, period. But the question is like, is a book being removed entirely from a school system, right? Is that a ban, or is it a ban where the book is removed from like all libraries, even, you know, the public libraries? Is that can constitute a ban? Does it constitute a ban if you do all of those, if you remove it from the schools and you remove it from the public libraries, and you say, all right, it's not even allowed to be printed? Like, does that? I think that would definitely constitute a ban, and I would actually argue that it would be a ban if you did not permit them to be in a public library. But I think it gets a little bit of it becomes an argument to have about whether or not certain books would be permitted in a school library, or whether or not certain books may be permitted to be in the curriculum. So I think, and I stand on the side that, number one, a school, you're there to learn, right? It's not this A school library is not quite the same as a public library, because a school library is part of a school for which you are there to learn and accomplish certain metrics. That's how it's designed. That's its current purpose. Its purpose isn't necessarily to be a catch-all for any reading material whatsoever. And to kind of prove my point, the same people that argue, "Oh, well, we can't ban books," just ask them a very simple question. Would you be okay with the Turner Diaries being in the public school? Maybe even multiple copies of them. Chances are, all of a sudden they're gonna have to start thinking about it, right? Like, they're gonna be like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe the Turner Diaries shouldn't be." Now, if you're not familiar with the Turner Diaries, that a lot of white supremacists uh, find that book to be enjoyable. I personally never read it, but it's apparently about like a coming race war, and apparently it is something that has given a lot of inspiration to white supremacists. So ask him that. Ask him. You know, and remember, I'm 45. I grew up when there was a time the Bible was a big deal in school, right? Like, the people on the left were like, you can't have that. It's got, it's got violence and sexually explicit material, and not everybody's, not everybody's religious. Some families, are atheist, or maybe they're Muslim, or they're Buddhist, or what have you. And so this isn't appropriate. And it was a clear in my, maybe not at the time because I was an evangelical at the time. It was, it was generally considered a clear understanding that you can't have it in the curriculum, but there were even people that threw a fit about it even being in the schools altogether. So it's an interesting flip flop to have seen in my life, where the once upon a time it was the left who were throwing a fit about a book or two, and then now all of a sudden it's the right. And so we've kind of flip flopped in terms of what's happening. But anyway, we're going to talk about this bill, and we're going to go through some things. Now, I did title this the Stranger Danger 2023 edition. So along the way, I'm going to play some Stranger Danger clips, one or two. And what I'm going to do is by the end, I'm going to tie in how these books share some commonality with the Stranger Danger of the 80s. Okay. And maybe not some commonality, but just like how are they connected? Like, what's the relationship? And so let's start with one clip here. And this is like, these clips are so weird. And this is actually from the 80s. So Stranger Danger is not explicitly the 80s and the 90s. I think that you will see there's another clip that actually is relatively recent, like, I don't know, like maybe 8, 10 years ago. But this one, that at least references it. But this clip is actually from the 80s. You can tell because it's in square format. It's not like widescreen. It's certainly not high def. So let's pull that up on the screen and give that a quick watch here, real quick.
You've taught your children to be polite and friendly, but have you taught them when not to be?
Hi there. Do you live around here?
He looks so creepy.
You going to school?
Yes.
Well, I could give you a ride.
Last year, 50,000 children disappeared, many of them from nice, safe neighborhoods.
It's okay. Come on, help me.
Talk to your children about not talking to strangers, and do it today. A message for your child's safety from the American Medical Association.
All right. So that is a little on the creepy side. The guy, could you imagine being the guy that asked, like, hey, will you be a creepy guy in a video trying to pick up children? And then imagine now you're out and about in life, and people, you like, imagine this guy's like at a bar and he's trying to talk to a woman. And she's like, what do you do? And he's like, I star in Stranger Danger ads. I'm the creepy guy that they try to tell you to have a conversation with your kids to keep away from me. Right. And that's the point I wanted to kind of drive home on, is the very end, where they said, have a conversation with your kids. And I think that's hopefully you'll start picking up where I'm going with this. But I think that's the critical part of this whole Stranger Danger thing. Like, I get it. A lot of these things, media, it's it's blown up to be a big thing. We watched some of those clips in the news article about this Senate bill, and some of the arguments that in my opinion, they were relatively dramatic. Like, the woman was like, this is evil. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know if you really need to go that far. Inappropriate seems like a sufficient word to use. I don't know that evil is necessarily, I wouldn't agree that some of the material, I've seen the material. I don't think it's appropriate for kids. I don't know that I would call it evil either. But let's continue on. So what I want to do is, well, let's see here. Let me read to you from CBS News. This is an article about the bill. And so let me read to you what Democratic Senator Amanda Capoletti said. And she's out of Montgomery County. So here's what she said. She said, exploring. Now, she's in favor of keeping these books as is. So she opposes this bill. And she says, quote, exploring human relationships, sex, and love are some of the most challenging and rewarding obstacles that we will face in life. And we need the right education and materials available to ensure people can explore those spaces safely and with the right knowledge to be able to interact with the world around them compassionately. Now, that sounds great, right? Like, I I wouldn't disagree with her comments in general. Like, if I just heard them apart from this particular issue, I would agree. Yes, exploring human relationships, sex and love, very challenging, but it's also a rewarding obstacle. And it's something that we all will face, no matter what our gender is, no matter what our sexuality is. She is correct. And I think she's also right to say that we need the right education and materials available to ensure that people can explore those spaces safely. Now, I don't know about the whole explore those spaces safely. Um, I think that it's just good to have the right education and materials to so that you can make knowledgeable and informed decisions. So I wouldn't say like I'm not going to try to encourage people to explore particular spaces. That seems a bit broad for me, but like otherwise, I'm pretty much in alignment with what she's saying here. The right knowledge to be able to interact with the world around them compassionately. Totally agree. I think we do need that knowledge. The question is, where should that knowledge come from? And my position when it comes to writing and books, there are some hundreds of thousands of words in the English language. There is some variation, some concatenation of them that can communicate an idea in any number of ways, right? Like you can write it, you could simply say, you're an idiot. Or you could tell somebody, I don't think you're seeing this correctly. I don't think that I think you're missing the point, right? There are all kind of ways to kind of let somebody know, I think that you don't have a good grasp on this particular topic, whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be this particular one. And that's the value of language, of writing and books, is that people can construct them in so many myriad of ways. So I think it's worth having an argument on what ways may be best or appropriate. Okay. And we are talking about kids. Now, when it comes to an adult, it's an entirely different ballgame. With an adult, I mean, anything goes. I can read anything. If I wanted to read the Turner Diaries or what was it, the Gender Queer, I think is the name of the book. If I want to read these, books, I should be able to. I'm an adult, but we're talking about children, and so the game changes a little bit when we're talking about children, and it even changes within that context because what is appropriate for, say, a sixth grader is not the same as what will be appropriate for, say, a ninth grader or a 10th grader or even a 12th grader, right? So I look at it and I say, there are even differences when we talk about children. Now, when I say the word children, I mean anybody that's under the age of 18. Maybe I should use the word minors because children tends to, we tend to think of like kids, like elementary school. There's not really a good word to properly include everybody from, say, toddler to high schooler. There's just not really a good word. Minor, I guess, would be the best word, but there are differences. And so it's okay to have this argument. And so we shall. So let's look at, I've got another video here, and it is about 5 minutes long. We're going to walk through it. Maybe I'll skip around. I don't know. We'll see how we're going to, but this is from the PA Senate GOP website. And so this is the bill's sponsor, Senator Ryan Ament, I believe is his name. So he is going over and he's kind of addressing some of these issues. So let me play this. Let's get this up on the screen here. And then we are going to play this bill. And I'm sorry, we're going to play this bill. We're going to play this clip. And I might pause it from time to time to see what we're talking about, to kind of just chime in. So here we are. And I'm going to make this full screen.
Madam President, listened, as I suspected, to debate this afternoon.
Yeah.
And as I suspected, we've heard the term book ban thrown around quite a bit, 13 times by my count. I believe the opponents of this bill know it's not a book ban. And I believe the opponents of this bill, when you look at the definitions, when you look at the definition of sexual conduct that is taken from Title 18, taken from the Crimes Code, know that that does not impact the great works of literature, Song of Solomon, But what it certainly may do is encourage conversation between educators and families, which is a good thing.
Okay, so let's pause there for a moment. I do think it's actually a good thing to get parents involved. This is a conversation that we've been having for decades. And we've been having it in a different space. We've been having it where we look at the school scores over the years. And if you can go back and you can look up old articles from like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And one of the chief complaints is that parents are not involved. But then also, one of the things that's pointed out is that when parents are involved, students do better. So there's been a long-standing issue with parental involvement. And I think this is actually a good thing to try to encourage it. We want parents to be involved in the learning process. Let me tell you a very quick story. I used to date a girl when I was like, I don't know, 19. And she came from a broken home. And she told me a story. And it's very quick. She just told me that she graduated high school and she probably shouldn't have. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to say like she got a failed education. It's not her fault. It's not her fault that the education system failed her. But she would tell me that because of her family life, she would sit at the dining table crying because she couldn't do her homework and her parents were unable to help, right? Because like or there were some it was somewhere between unable to and unwilling. Um, and so this is a problem. Like when parents are involved, students do better. When they're not involved, for whatever reason, whether they can't do it or whether they refuse to, they're too busy, they're ignoring it. This is a problem for students because then they have to go to school and then figure out how to skate by. And then in this particular case, I called her a public school push through. This is the reason why I am so adamantly against public schools in the first place. Not a conversation we're going to have today, but it's because of things like this. Because she struggled at home, she struggled with her work, and she still got to graduate as if she did not have any of those struggles. So the education system failed her. And we can directly tie this to parental involvement. So I totally agree with him that parental involvement is a good thing. And you might remember from the video clip that I played that like 1980s, the very end, the American Medical Association said, have a conversation with your kids. Parental involvement is absolutely necessary. All right, so let's continue listening to Senator, what is his name again? Ahmed. Yeah, Ahmed.
Which is a healthy thing. Many of the organizations that have sent in position papers and submitted testimony to our standing committee during the hearing last week, they called it a book ban. They know it's not a book ban. They all know this bill will not ban a single book. But a book ban is perhaps the only argument they have because they know the more that people know the truth and see these images, the harder it is to oppose Senate Bill 7. They know that the more people that see these explicit images found in these books, extremely graphic images, and the more schools that make these books available to kids without parental knowledge, the more support we receive for Senate Bill 7. The momentum continues to build. They know that if they can distract from the true purpose of this bill by even falsely labeling the book as an attack on the LGBTQ community, as if the only books available to that community are excessively sexually explicit.
So I think that is probably the most interesting point that I've heard in this entire conversation, no matter what state it's come from. And that's a very good point. People now, there are cases where books that are not sexually explicit are being removed. Unfortunately, Florida, my home state, happens to be one of them. That's because the bill that they drafted and they put into place was so over the top that it was going to catch all kind of books, right? Like it didn't address the problem that parents are having. The problem that parents are having, and they're like, why is my child reading this sexually explicit material? But I think he makes a very good point. Is that the only material that is available to help the LGBTQ community as that one. What did she say? Let me go back to that real quick, where she said, exploring Senator Amanda Capoletti, exploring human relationships, sex, and love are some of the most challenging and rewarding obstacles that we will face in life. We need the right education and materials available to ensure people can explore those spaces safely and with the right knowledge to be able to interact with the world around them compassionately. I think he raises a good question. Like, are the only books available for the LGBTQ community sexually explicit books that can accomplish this? Like, that's what they have to offer? They don't have other books that are comparable to, say, the straight community? That's a good question to ask, and one I think that should be asked maybe a bit more. Put people on the spot. All right, so let's go back and let's continue. Let's continue listening to the senator.
They can perhaps continue to ignore the will of parents all across this Commonwealth by voting against this legislation. Time and time again, survey after survey reinforces that parental empowerment is important to Americans despite political affiliation or racial identity. Parents want to know what's happening in their child's school, and we firmly believe they have a right to know. This bill is not an attack on teachers. Of the more than 500 people that have personally contacted my office in the last few weeks in support of this bill, many are educators. They too have been appalled at the sexually explicit content in some of our schools. Safe to say that the position provided to us by organizations representing teachers is not shared by all teachers. But instead of an honest conversation about what the bill actually does, and more importantly in this case doesn't do, we continue to hear the cries of book ban.
All right. So I'm going to stop it there because, it's 7:30. We don't want to spend our whole time watching everything, but I think he's correct. We need to have an honest conversation. Now, the video clip that I played at the very beginning, that video, that's the one from the news article. Like I said, I think some of those comments were, a bit exaggerated on both sides, right? Like the woman called it evil. The other people are like, this is a violation of children's constitutional rights. I don't agree with either one of those. At the end of the day, I, as a parent, because I have a child, I will be sending my son to a school. Now he goes to preschool right now. And when he comes home, he's got a little folder and we pull out the stuff and we talk about what he's been learning. When he watches YouTube, which I allow him to watch you, or, we allow him to watch YouTube, I generally give him free reign. We put it on the kids section. And then I peek over very frequently just to see what he's watching, make sure it's not some weird stuff that's not appropriate for his age. Otherwise, I let him enjoy and explore the world around him. But I am involved. I want to know what my child, the content that my child is consuming. I want to know the content that he's consuming in the house, and I would want to know when it's at school. So I think the idea that a parent wants to be involved is not absurd whatsoever. Now, let's continue with the stranger danger um, uh, videos, and then we're going to get on to a bill review. So let's see. Do I want to do it in that order? Yeah, let's do it in that order. Let's move this over here. So this next video. So you saw the video from the 80s. Okay. And that was like a little girl walking and it had that creepy guy. And he's like, hey, where are you going? You going to school? I can give you a ride. He opens the door and then he's like, come on in. And then they're like, hey, have a conversation with your parent or with your child about, strangers and all that, which I think is a good thing. I mean, we don't want to scare our kids, but we do want to have a conversation with them and tell them, hey, this is not a good thing. Don't do this. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, as it turns out, teenagers, adolescent kids sometimes show us exactly why we need to have these conversations. So let's take a look at a video because I think there's something very interesting about this video. So here we are, and we're going to pull this up on the screen. There we are, and go.
That is the chilling scream of a 14-year-old girl who just jumped into a stranger's van.
14.
She expected to see a boy she met online. Instead, she got the shock of her life. Good evening. I'm Alice Gaynor.
Welcome back. I'm Dick Brennan. The teenager's parents were always in on the plot and nobody was hurt.
The goal was to teach the kids about the dangers of social media. But as CBS 2's Dave Carlin shows us, for some, the message is not getting through.
Michaela, are you crazy? What's wrong with you?
What are you thinking?
These parents are screaming at their underage daughters after their girls put themselves in extreme stranger danger. The parents consented, allowing this man, Kobe Person, to conduct and videotape the chilling social experiment.
I made a fake profile on Facebook posing as a 15-year-old boy.
Would the 3 girls he contacted meet with him all alone? Each time the answer was yes. And each time the parents were right there, at first hiding. In this case, behind masks in the back of a kidnapper van.
Gotta stop it, your mother and father.
It's tough, and it's scary, and it's getting people's attention.
21 million views in 2 days.
Person, a professional prankster from Clifton, New Jersey, says he found the parents with a Craigslist ad.
We approached them in a very professional manner.
The parents, including this man who was about to surprise his 12-year-old daughter letting a stranger in the house, said, "Not my kid." So imagine the shock.
You're 12 years old. This guy's 20 years old. You could have been raped and murdered. We already lost your mother. What would I do if anything happened to you?
It's really showing parents that this could happen to anybody.
Watching the video with child psychologist Susan Bartell.
Taylor, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
This poor father, he's frantic. He's absolutely frantic.
But she is not surprised.
From my own personal clinical experience, many girls will go with strangers into potentially dangerous situations.
We have to talk.
Dr. Bartell wants parents and kids to watch the video together, and then the parents lay down the law.
You can't assume that if they're telling you they've never done it or that they wouldn't do it, that in fact that's truthful. The rule is you never go anywhere alone with a stranger. It doesn't matter how much you're tempted to.
Some say these parents went too far.
A little bit drastic.
But Kobe Person says the parents did everyone a favor.
I think they are heroes.
Parents who love their kids enough to scare them.
Don't you ever do this again.
And save them. In Midtown, Dave Carlin, CBS 2 News.
Now, to see the video in its entirety, visit our website, cbsnewyork.com.
All right. So I don't know that we need to see the video in entirety. Kind of gives me a little bit of chills. I have a son, so I don't have a daughter. I imagine that if I had a daughter, I would probably be really freaked out by the video. The point here, what I'm not trying to do, I'm not trying to scare people and suggest that, hey, if we allow sexually explicit books in our schools, that all of a sudden our kids are going to be out romping around with, grown men. The connection that I'm making here is that for many years, it's been important for parents to be involved in their children's life in all aspects. When they're younger, they don't know any better, right? Obviously, nobody doubts that a 7-year-old might be willing to get into the car of a stranger, might be willing to make a bad decision. Okay. That's the key here, the decision making. We just happen to use in this show, I'm using some of these clips to kind of illustrate the bad decision making. But even when they get to be 12, 13, and 14, they make bad decisions, right? So again, let me read that. Exploring human relationships, sex and love are some of the most challenging and rewarding obstacles that we will face in life. That is absolutely correct. What that means is when we get to the part, we need the right education and materials available to ensure people can explore those spaces safely. Yes, we do. We need them for that very reason. Not because all of our kids are going to read a book and then go out and then get kidnapped. That's not what it's about. What it's about is learning to make good decisions, because many decisions, many bad decisions could end up impacting their entire life. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, I knew several girls who were like in 9th grade and they were having children, right? They made a bad decision in their effort to explore human relationships, sex, and love. They made a bad decision. And what happened? They ended up getting pregnant way too early. It affected their school. It affected their entirety of their future. So it is absolutely important. The other thing that I want to point out is that in the 80s, we told parents, have a conversation with your kids, get involved. This video here that I just showed you, I think it was around 2008. And I'd have to look back again, but it's around 2008 when this video came out. Might have been a little bit later, but it's about a decade old or so, right? So about a decade ago, we were still telling parents, get involved in your kids, know what they're doing, ask questions, be a part of their life. But now we're in a situation where parents are trying to be involved and they're saying, hey, we don't think that's appropriate material for our kids. And we're upset that you have presented it to them without our knowledge. And now all of a sudden, instead of the message being, yes, be involved in your kid's life, it's, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You don't need to be in charge of the schools. You don't need to be dictating. But since when? Since when did parents no longer need to be involved in their kids' lives? Since when did 12, 13, 14, even 17-year-olds, since when did they start making good decisions? And I mean like on the regular. I'm not saying that they never make good decisions. They do, but they don't always make good decisions. That is part of growing up. Many people know somebody who's 25 and continues to make poor decisions. This is because largely because there weren't parents involved. We look on the news and we see things like kids being shot. Remember a couple episodes ago, I told you the story of Adam Toledo, a 13-year-old boy who was out running around in the neighborhood, ended up having a gun in his hand, was chased by the police. And then the officer was like, hey, put that gun down. He moved a little bit too fast for the officer. The officer shot him dead, right? This is all part of the same issue. Parents need to be involved. We need to be encouraging parents to be more involved. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're doing it wisely. We need to have the right education and materials, as Senator Amanda Capoletti said. We need to have the right education and materials available to help them learn to make good decisions, which means parents do need to be involved because parents need to be part of the process. So let's get on to that bill review. I'm going to actually pull it up and I'm going to actually just read through the bill. I'm going to try to read through it quickly, but it's only 4 pages. That's the cool part. It's only 4 pages. Now I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going to tell you right now. Normally I do a bill review and I don't like the bill. And when I say I don't like it, there might be 1 or 2 things that I can appreciate about the bill, but on balance, I say, nope, this is not a good bill. I actually don't feel that way about this one. I'm actually looking at this bill and I'm like, it's not so bad, actually. Like as a parent, if this bill were to be something that they had tried to pass in Florida, I think I would have agreed with it. I think I might have called my legislators and said, hey, you should support this bill. So let's pull that up on the screen and we're going to walk through it really quickly. And I'll try not to bore you at 7:40 in the morning with the Senate bill. All right. But we're going to read through it. I'm going to explain to you along the way why I think that this is a pretty decent bill. Now, that doesn't mean it's not perfect. That doesn't mean it's perfect. Like there are certainly problems with the bill. I'm sure. But when I read it a couple times and I was like, I think I'm okay with this bill. All right. So it doesn't have a name. Some bills have a name. I'm not really sure how that worked, but we'll just go with Senate Bill number 7. And let's see, we'll go down here. So remember, when you're reading a bill, in many cases, what they'll do is they'll have an underline for anything that they're going to add to the current statute. And then they will have a strike through for anything that they're going to remove. So as we're reading through and you're seeing this, that's what we're looking at here. So this one is going to amend the Public School Code of 1949, the Act of March 10, 1949. So PL 30, number 40, whatever. So you can go look up and read the fullness of everything. So what this is doing is amending this particular public school code by adding this section. So it's say parental control relating to instructional materials and books containing sexually explicit content. The governing body of a school entity shall develop a public policy that provides parental control of instructional materials and books containing sexually explicit content and includes information, guidance, procedures, and standards relating to. We'll get to that in a second. The first thing that I like about this is the bill does not explicitly say this is how you're going to run the schools. What it does say is the governing body of a school entity shall develop a public policy that provides. So it's like you need to figure this out. Like, right? Like we're not gonna enshrine every detail into law. We're gonna give you a framework and tell you go. So let's look at that framework that they give. So they want them to directly identify specific instructional materials containing explicitly sexually explicit content. So that's very interesting. They get away from the word subjects and they say content. And I assume that this was an amended part of the bill. But I actually agree here. I think that they should absolutely focus on the content, not the subject. We all know that health class is going to have some sexually explicit stuff, right? Like that's just the nature of it. You can't have a health class without talking about body parts, and you can't talk about body parts without showing some generic pictures. So they're going to, they're talking about explicit content rather than a subject, which I think helps focus to more specifically what needs to be addressed and what things are just going to cause the kids to giggle, right? Because that's what's going to happen. Like some things you're going to show it depending on their age, of course. Obviously, if they're high schoolers, they shouldn't be giggling as much, but they probably will because they'll be like, haha, well, see, you're seeing this, I'm seeing that, whatever. So moving along, so content that are used by or made available to students at schools in the school entity. Okay, so now they're like narrowing it down. Remember at the top of the show, I suggested that what is a book ban, right? Is a book ban something that bans a book from a school? Is it something that bans it from the public library? Does it require banning it from Amazon? Or do we need to throw them all in a big, huge fire? Like, what does a ban mean? I think we need to have a little bit more formal definition of what does not constitute a ban. But what they're saying is right off the bat, we're focused on what's in school and we're focused on the content. Now, going along here, number 2, directly identifying books within libraries of the schools containing sexually explicit content, again, that are used by or made available to students at schools in the school entity. So they're just saying like you need to identify them that have sexually explicit content. And we're going to talk about the word sexually. I think they give it a definition later on for a sexually explicit. So then number 3, and again, this is part of the framework of what the state of Pennsylvania is requiring of schools, implementing the use of an opt-in form to ensure parental control of, again, sexually explicit content. The following shall apply. And so then it gives the three criteria here. A student shall be prohibited from being provided or having access to sexually explicit content in the classroom or library unless a parent or legal guardian has signed and returned an opt-in form providing their permission. I do believe that when it comes to things like this, opt in, not opt out, is more appropriate. Opt in means at least the parent had to look at a piece of paper and sign their name in order for the child to have permission. Now, I know that some children might forge it. I get all that. But the point here is that you want to inform parents of what you're doing because within an opt out, you don't, it's opt in is a more active process, whereas opt out is a more passive one because you're automatically included in, and then you have to go out of your way to one, know that there's an opt out process, and then two, actually go forward with that. Otherwise, you're just in, right? Like the child is in. With an opt in process, which is more active, it says by default, the child cannot have access unless you give permission. This is a good thing because parents right now, all across the country, are throwing a huge fit. So this tells parents, hey, this is what you're opting in. And then remember, We go back a little bit and it says directly identifying books within the libraries of the schools containing sexually explicit content. So now the parents are being told, here is what your child will be given access to, or what will be used in the curriculum that your child will be learning. Therefore, please let us know that this is okay. If it's not okay, by default, your child doesn't get to be included. All right. So then we go on. If the student's parent or legal guardian does not give permission for the student to be provided or have access to sexually explicit content, or the parent or legal guardian has not submitted a completed opt-in form, the student shall be provided with alternative non-explicit instructional materials and related activities. Now, hopefully, now it's not defined here, but this again, you're getting parents involved, so they should make this known. Remember a moment ago when the Senator Ahmeter, I can't remember his name now, but the guy who introduced the bill, he said, is sexually explicit content the only material available to LGBTQ to help them navigate relationships and sexual activities, right? And knowing about their body and so on and so forth. Like, is that the only thing that there is to offer? This is where the parents of LGBTQ students can come into play. They can say, some of them might not want, some of them might look and say, look, I'm LGBTQ, or my child is. We have a healthy relationship, but I think this is too much for my child because it's not age appropriate. So then this parent, because they're getting involved, or they should be, we should be encouraging them to get involved. They should come out and say, here are some resources that I would like you, or give me some alternatives that will teach my child some of the same things, but with less explicit content, or without explicit content, right? So they're opening the door widely for parental involvement, but they're also making sure that if a parent thinks that something is okay, then it's okay. So that's why it's not that's why it can't be called a book ban, because it's not really banning books. All it's doing is saying you got to have your parents' permission. It's no, it would be weird to say you're banning field trips because a parent has to opt in, because a parent has to explicitly give permission. It would be odd. Like, nobody would go, well, you're banning field trips, because it's absurd. All right, let's continue on. All right, so then let's see. That was number 2. So then number 3, the opt-in form must include the following language. By signing this document, I am giving permission for my child to be provided books, handouts, and instructional material that may include written or visual depictions of sexual conduct. Sexual conduct is defined in law as, quote, acts of masturbation, sexual intercourse, sexual bestiality. I don't have time to go into that one, but I did do a little research. That one was weird. Or physical contact with a person's clothed or unclothed genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or if the girl is a female, breast. Now, the one argument I would make, I would say, like, actually, it should include breast altogether. I don't think there's any, like, they're part of the body. I get it. Comedians have made jokes and said, like, male breasts are just for decoration, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, it is it can be, not always, but it can be part of sexual arousal. So I don't think they should have excluded male breast, but I get it. So we'll move on. Then the last item here, and again, this is the last item of they're defining the framework, and then they're saying, all right, books containing sexually explicit content includes information, guidance, procedures, and standards relating to. So it's, these are all relating to. So then we get to that last one here. Number 4, the opt-in form must include a list of book titles and materials scheduled to be used as part of a curriculum and class discussion, or available within the school, that meet the definition of sexually explicit content. So again, you're simply informing parents what is going on. You're saying, here's what we have, opt in or opt out. And at that point, if parents feel unsatisfied with what's available, if they look at it and they say, well, I don't like the selection that you're providing, I think it's too sexually explicit. And then they say, what's the alternative? And then the alternative doesn't help students learn what they need to learn at an age appropriate level, then they can start having that conversation. All right, going on. We're about halfway through the bill. Like this is a simple bill. Number 4, permitting the parent or legal guardian of a student to review instructional materials and library books that contain sexually explicit content upon request. Great. Parents should be involved. They should know what they're doing. When my son comes home, my wife and I, we open up and he gets a book from the library once a week, and we take a look at the book and we read it to him, and we make sure it's always good content. We don't have any issues there, but we review it. We participate in this process with him. We open up his little folder and we see what the school has taught him for the day, right? And we'll see the artwork that he's done and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the week, the school sends another paper and it says, here's what they'll be learning about next week. So it kind of gives us a heads up for what's going on the next week. So we're, like he's 4.5, and we are participating. This is a good thing. This is what we want. All right. Now this is subsection to 4. Prior to adopting the policies required under this section, the governing body, where do we go here? Okay. So the governing body of a school entity shall seek input at a public forum to ensure that the policies are consistent with this section and adopted no later than August 30th, 2024. So now what they've said is that here's this framework. We want, and remember, this is a Senate bill. This is a bill at the state level for Pennsylvania. And they're saying, here is a framework. We want some generic, this is the generic guidelines that we're giving you. And we want you to put together public policy or a school policy on exactly how this is going to work with this criteria in mind. And then we want you to have a public forum for parents to come in and have input. So again, this is legislation that is getting in, this legislation here is requiring that public schools put in a policy, but they also include parents in helping to craft that policy. That means they have to have a public forum to make sure that the policies are consistent, and then they have to adopt them by a specific date. This is a good thing. Nothing in this section shall be construed to, number one, prohibit a school entity from implementing additional transparency measures for sexually explicit content. Now, why might a school want to implement additional transparency? Maybe they want something more than what's going on, what's written in here. Maybe they're a religious school or a private school that has that just looks at it and says, you know what, we take a different view. The public schools are a little bit more open to a certain material, whereas we're not as open to it, right? So they may want to have a stricter set of transparency or policies. That's a good thing. Number 2, and again, this is nothing in this section shall be construed to. 2, prohibit a school entity from determining that sexually explicit content is not appropriate for minors or students of certain ages within the school entity, notwithstanding if the content would not violate other laws. So they could easily say, all right, this is okay for a high school student where it's not okay for an elementary school student. And I think that is very, very appropriate. There are certain things that, like, when you get to be in high school, the reality is most things in the world are relatively age appropriate, right? And I mean, not everything. Well, let me change that. Let me rephrase that. I want to make sure that I'm being very clear here. A great many things are okay for them. They will not be harmed from it. We shouldn't obviously let our high school students watch a bunch of hardcore sexual material. But there are a lot of books that at that point, they are adult enough to read and they won't be harmed. Okay. So I think it's okay in the context of a school to say, well, this we believe is appropriate for high school students, but not appropriate for elementary students or maybe even junior high students. And again, this is including parents. So parents are part of this process. All right. Number 3, permit the distribution of sexually explicit materials to minors that are prohibited by other law. So again, this is not to be construed. Where to go here? This is not to be, nothing in this section shall be construed to permit the distribution of sexually explicit materials to minors that are prohibited by other law. So in other words, they're making clear, like, hey, this isn't some underhanded way for you to be like this doesn't just give you a license to do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Like they're just making that be very clear. D, as used in this section, the following words. Now, this is the interesting part. The following words and phrases shall have the meanings given to them in the subsection unless the context clearly indicates otherwise. I love these kind of parts when we're reading bills because sometimes words mean something to one person, they don't mean something to other people, right? What is a book ban? A lot of people are calling this bill a book ban, but it clearly isn't because it is not banning a book. It's simply saying without a child, without a parent's permission, there is certain material that you're not allowed to access. We already have that in society. We and it's very acceptable. A movie theater, which I don't know if they actually do, but they can say like, look, if you're not 17 or older, you can't come into this movie. If you're not 18 or older, if you don't have a parent with you, if you're at a certain age, we're not going to let you into this movie, right? Like this already exists. And remember, I would normally oppose many things being put into law because I don't think that we need them. But in this particular case, we are talking about public schools, which require students to attend or at least attend a school. So if your parents can't afford to send you to a private school that has that runs the show the way that they feel is appropriate, then that means they have to send you to a public school. They are required to. So since you are required to go to a public school at a minimum, then that means that there is that I think it's very appropriate to start outlining what you can and cannot have access to in that particular environment. Now, if it was a completely voluntary environment, sending your child to say a Catholic school, then I think the situation would be a little different. We don't need nearly as much government input. All right, moving on. So a school entity is defined as a school district, intermediate unit, joint school, area career, technical school, charter school, regional charter school, and cyber charter school. So basically, any school, any kind of school that you might send your kid to. Sexual conduct. And this is a good one. Acts of masturbation, sexual intercourse, sexual bestiality. Again, that's a weird one. And there's actually a weird history why that's included. We don't have time to go over that. Physical contact with the person's clothed or unclothed genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or if the person is a female, breast. I'd say they should probably include boys as well because again, if depending on what's being depicted, it could be considered sexual. So I think this is the one thing that I have an issue with this bill is that they actually should have included males too. Um, ex- Now, what does sexually explicit content mean? This is getting what I think we're getting at the very end here. The term shall include the following: materials that contain visual or visually implied depictions of sexual conduct or simulations of sexual conduct. Two, materials that contain explicit and excessive written descriptions of sexual conduct. Materials that contain visual depictions of nudity accessible to minors in kindergarten through 8th grade. So, sexually explicit content is considered sexual acts, effectively, whether they're written or they're visual. And if they're written, depending on how they're written, if they're harlequin romance, right? Excessive written descriptions of sexual conduct, right? If that's considered sexually explicit content. So it's very, very narrow here. It's like, look, we're not just talking about a naked body in health class. We're talking about explicitly sexual conduct, things that adults do during sexy time. Okay. And then they add in, and I do appreciate this, materials that contain visual depictions of nudity accessible to minors in kindergarten through 8th grade. Grade 8 might have been a little bit heavy. I don't know. Um, I'm not there yet with my son, so I don't really have a good gauge whether or not I think an 8th grader should be able to see some sort of nudity in terms of health class. That I'm not sure about just yet. So maybe it's a little excessive, maybe not. It does seem like maybe because I think of grade 7 and 8 as junior high. You might consider 6th grade, but at least 7 and 8 junior high. And I think that's a good time. Kids are starting puberty. That's a good time to start having these kind of conversations. So if they see like a very generic, like the person that's just standing there, like this, and it's nuded, and they're nude and they're like explaining the different parts of the body and the different things that happen and blah. I'm not so sure that that's a problem necessarily for junior high. So maybe they went a little bit overboard in that particular case. But overall, I think this is actually a good bill. And then that is actually the end of it. This act shall take effect in 60 days. So that's my review of the bill. I think Senate Bill 7 out of Pennsylvania is a good bill. There might be some opportunities to, narrow to clean it up a little bit and improve it. But I think overall, it is a good bill. I think the connection between stranger danger in the 80s and now is that in the 80s and then even a decade ago, we were telling parents to get involved in their child's life. And now we're telling people, hey, you mind your business. We're the school, we'll take care of this. We've got librarians, for God's sake, and they will figure it out for you. I think that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. And this is, and the fact, and when we start removing parents from the equation, then what we'll start seeing is students and young people making more bad decisions than they otherwise would. Kids always make bad decisions. That's the nature of growing up. You have to learn how to make decisions, which means in the process, you will make bad decisions. Hopefully, we can move our society to a place where our 14-year-old girls aren't trying to go and get in a van with somebody they think is a teenage boy. And in that particular video clip, the boy was supposed to be 15 and he rolls up in a van. Like that should have been something that the girl said, "Whoa, wait, what are you talking about? A 15, you can't even drive." And then all of a sudden you got a creepy white van. Like that should have been a red flag. That could have been a red flag if we have a society that values the connection that parents and children have and including them in every space where a child is learning to make decisions. And we're going to go back, and I really like repeating this. Exploring human relationships, sex, and love are some of the most challenging and rewarding obstacles that we will face in life. Totally agree. And we need to make sure, as Senator Amanda Capoletti of Montgomery County said, we need the right education and materials available to ensure people can explore those spaces safely with the right knowledge to be able to interact with the world around them compassionately. And it doesn't even have to be compassionately, right? You just need to be able to have the right knowledge and the right education and materials so that you can interact, so that our kids can learn to interact with the world around them at their best so that they don't get harmed. Now, I want to address one more thing, and I'm a little over time, but that's okay. I'm gonna share a quick story because the big concern that people have is they say, well, if a child, if a teenager happens to read something, it's not going to be harmful to them. I agree with that sentiment on its face. So let me tell you a story. When I was in a Catholic school for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I think I was in 7th grade at the time. A couple of my buddies, they said, hey, over on the bookshelf, there's like a little book. It was actually a book cart. But they were like, over on the book cart, there's a book that doesn't have a cover. Like the cover is taken off of both the front and the back. And they were like, it's an adult book. And I was like, what? And so I went over and I found it. And it was a book, like a Harlequin romance type book, sexually explicit book. I read the entire thing. I would say from cover to cover, but they ripped off the covers. But I read the entire thing. Let me tell you, it was quite sexually graphic. I had absolutely no business reading that. Now, this was my buddies doing this. Like my friends, they somehow came across the book and they did this. So it wasn't the school. Like clearly the Catholic school at that time at my age, I'm pretty sure even now, but definitely at my age, they would have never they would have had a fit if they had found that book on there. Was I harmed by this? No, I was not. However, I happened to come across this and I knew that it was material that I wasn't supposed to be reading, which means in my mind, if I know I'm not supposed to be reading it, then I know that what I'm reading is probably not appropriate. Now, I don't have all of this knowledge in 7th grade. I know it now because I'm 45. I can look back and I can say, yeah, I probably intuitively understood a few things. I didn't understand the full gravity of everything. I could, but the reality is that coming across this material in itself, just happenstance, is not necessarily going to be harmful. And kids will get to it in good time. no need to rush things, right? Like I don't teach my son to swear. I try not to swear when I'm around. I try to watch content that is appropriate for his age so that what he picks up and he learns is something that I'm going to be comfortable with. I talk to him in the same way that I want him to talk to me or any other adult. And it's not that I'm a prude. It's not that I'm like, oh man, he can never hear a profanity. Like sometimes it happens. Sometimes we're watching a PG-13 movie and a word comes up that I would rather he not hear. It's okay if it happens occasionally, right? But again, I'm the parent making this decision. And what I'm trying to do is not rush him into all the unsavory things that adults know about. He will get there eventually. When I was growing up, I got there on my own with all my friends' help. We don't need the adults to help them. We need the adults to be adults. We need them to say, this is not appropriate. And if our children question us, then we need to be prepared to have an answer. Why is this not appropriate? Right? We want them to make good decisions. In order for them to make good decisions, guess what they need to see? They need to see us making good decisions. They need to see us involved in making an argument why this is not a good decision or why something is a good decision. So I want to encourage parents out there or non-parents to push for this idea that parents get involved. We need to, we talk about normalizing this and that. We need to normalize the idea that parents are involved positively in their lives. And if a parent says, hey, this school is not allowing you to read the book, I think that this book is appropriate for your age, then get on Amazon and go buy the book, read it with them. Be a parent. All right. That's the end of my show, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I want you to catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Then again, Sunday nights at 7 p.m. with my co-host, Susan Hogarth. We're going to look across the vastness of tyranny in this country, and we're going to find what exactly is the Libertarian Party doing about it. What are they doing at the state level? What are they doing at the local level? And then we're going to bring it to you and let you know about it. That way, you'll be inspired to do some of those same things in your community, and you'll feel good about the party that you're involved with, that they're doing things to help push for more liberty. Be sure to do all the proper audience actions. I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.libertydad.com. Go over to rumble.libertydad.com and subscribe there. Do all the normal things, ring the bell, like videos. Throw me a comment in the comment section. I do try to read them. And if you want to follow me on social media, do so. Liberty Dad on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, or email me at libertydadpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And lastly, remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to catch, fumbled there. Have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.